Welcome to a special episode of The Diplomats. I'm Go Horns Go from the Nexus server. Joining me today is my partner in crime, Umble the Heap, who's got some good news to share. This podcast is sponsored to you by diplomacybriefing.com, and we also have a special guest, B. Cyper, who we will introduce in a second. Umble, before we get to our podcast, tell us about our sponsor, diplomacybriefing.com.
Diplomacy Briefing is the weekly newsletter, email for everything that's going on in diplomacy. We keep you updated on every tournament that's going on, any changes, any new variants that come out, any new announcements. I'm excited that actually this Friday is going to be the very first time that our editorial team will do an issue. So we got 3 people that have become part of our team, and so now there's 4 people. Each one of us are taking different issues, and so you're going to begin to, I think, see a little bit more creativity, different sides, because we have more people that are involved in it. That's going to be coming out tomorrow, but it is a free email. You can sign up for it at diplomacybriefing.com and follow through Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and just keep up to date with what's going on in the hobby.
Well, if you're not going to be taking the lead, then I assure you there will be more creativity.
We shall see.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the second season of the Nexus Cold War tournament. And Umble, do you see the screen here? You've been crowned the winner of the Cold War tournament. Cold War is a variant. Congratulations.
That's great. You know, I've been keeping an actual real crown in a chest for this day. And now that finally I've actually won something, I've got it out. I've been wearing it everywhere. My wife thinks it's ridiculous, but I'm kidding. That's actually not true. But I have thought about it.
You've not won anything in diplomacy yet. You're just talking about you won a game. I mean, you won a tournament.
I won a tournament. It is not classic. That is true. It is not classic. That is lots of seconds, thirds, and fourths when it comes to classic diplomacy, but never a first. But this is a start. This is a start, a stepping stone to hopefully a first someday.
You're the acorn that grows into the tree. Although you got a little work to do. I see here you had 1 defeat. You were just 10-1.
Yeah, that particular game, I just started it. And we were over with some friends, my wife and I, and it was spring 1960. The moves there write themselves that first year. If those that played the variant know, pretty much the first year both powers do the same moves. And for some reason, I just didn't think about it, and I put one of my armies going to the wrong place. And so right at the beginning, I misordered, and then I could have maybe come back. But there was a guess in there that I was wrong, and by that at that point, the combination of those two, I wasn't able to come back to win. My whole dream had been to verse myself in the finals. That had been my goal because it's a bracket system. You have 2 different sides you start on, and I was close. I was 2 wins maybe away from being able to do that, and I lost. So that was somewhat heartbreaking.
So just to be clear, you made a mistake.
Yes, I did. In fact, there's another Cold War tournament going on over at VDIP, and I lost 1 game over there. Thankfully, it was just round robin play, but it was the same. Actually, there's been 3 in these 2 tournaments. There's been 3 times I've misordered that have really hurt me, but they've not hurt me enough that I've lost the tournament. I'm actually right now waiting in the finals at VDIP for the people that come out from the other side. So yeah, I've really got to watch that. It's easy. I find it's very easy to make misorders in this game because you're playing with so many different units quickly, a lot of units. And so you've really, really got to pay attention.
Well, it's on record now. You make mistakes. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
You're not a machine. You're a man. You're fallible. Right. All right. I'm just letting all our listeners soak that in. I think it's time we bring in our special guest here, B. Cyper, who was the season 1 champion of the Nexus Cold War tournament, and I think mostly plays on VDIP. How are you doing, man?
Hi, I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm doing fine. So far, it's a perfect podcast with Humble being victorious in season 2 and admitting mistakes. I couldn't imagine anything better. Uh, so I think, before we talk about the tournament a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into playing Cold War. Do you play diplomacy? Just give us some background to the listeners, the throngs
Uh,
of people.
yeah. Hello, throngs of people. How you doing? Uh, so I got into diplomacy, I think about 4 years ago. My little brother got me into it, and he had bought a diplomacy board game, and he was really excited about it. We played it with some friends, and we, we played it, and those friends no longer talk to us. The whole 9 yards. Uh, and so we were in different places for a while, and he just texted me out of the blue that like, hey, V Diplomacy is a way that you can play online, and they had, I think at the time, a new variant, the Divided States variant, with 50 states to play as. And this was exciting, so we rounded up a bunch of our other friends and got onto the website, and we played one of the first games there. And I just kept on playing more diplomacy since then. Cold War specifically, though, that came as a result of there's a 1v1 ladder on V Diplomacy that we just I got into at the bottom of the ladder, and I kept on getting my butt handed to me every time we played Cold War, so I just resolved to get better at it, and then there was a tournament, so that was exciting.
So, we have a map, Spring 1960 map. I think you mentioned earlier, this is when the game begins, but why don't you give our listeners who may not, like me, I've never played it, I don't know anything about it other than it's entitled Cold War and it looks between the US and USSR. But why don't you give our listeners a little background on the variant and how it's different than classic diplomacy, and any other observations that you think might be useful?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and say a few things, and then, Cypher, if you want to maybe add in some of the reasons you like the variant. For me personally, I'm not a big variant player. This is with any like real passion, this is the only variant I've played, and there's probably maybe 3 or 4 variants I've ever done. I think the only ones I've ever really done are 1v1 variants. But Cold War, when I was first looking at it, when Nexus was going to do a tournament last year, I tried it out, and one of the reasons I really, really like Cold War is that the games are always different after 2 or 3 years. You're not going to come across the same type of game. In the first 2 years, yes, but by the time you get to 1962, usually things just get very different. So there's a ton of creativity, and it is a very balanced map. When you look at the 3 different platforms that Cold War is on, VDIP, Duplicity, and Conspiracy, you'll find that NATO and USSR pretty much, have a pretty even win record. So there's a lot of balance, and there's just a lot of different options to go about making your attacks. It requires a great deal, I think, of flexibility. And if you like tactics, which is something I've always enjoyed tactics. This is a great map to teach you how to do it. I played a lot of classic diplomacy in the last 12 years, and a lot of times, at least on the map side, it can sometimes feel a little bit stale. Like the stabs are great, that's really enjoyable, but you sometimes can feel like you're making the same type of moves. So the diplomacy is where it's at on that. But on this, the tactics are so fluid that it's always kind of a challenge. And so I really enjoy the map for that. There's really, I kind of drop it into 4 different spheres that you're battling. You have North America, you have the Southeast, you have Europe, and then you have the Mediterranean. And there's some middle ground, but that's really where a lot of the battles are happening. And so a lot of times, you may be losing in one area, and you'll quickly redeploy to another area to try to keep things going the same. You need 17 supply centers to win. So everybody starts with 6, and pretty much in the normal play you go to 10. So you're really kind of fighting over those, trying to get 7 more. And usually you get to about a 13-13 or 13-14 break pretty quick, and just 2 centers can really change the balance of the game. So because of that, that's a reason I really enjoy the variant. You can play it relatively quickly because most games usually end in 1964, maybe 1965. That's pretty common, especially with your average players. I think elite players is probably more like 1966, 1967. But yeah, it's a very, very enjoyable variant, and that's one of the reasons I like it, just because it's always unique, and it's just on the tactical side, which is something I've always greatly enjoyed.
Do either of you guys know how long it's been around?
Yeah, 2015 is when it came out.
Who started it, if you know?
It's V Diplomacy. 2 guys by the name, or Safari and Firehawk, as I recall. And yeah, it's quickly become the most popular variant on all of those 3 platforms to play. It's just really, really enjoyable. And so as more platforms adopt it, it's going to become, I think, even more played because it is just fun to play.
So my powers of deduction tell me that since it's 1v1, there's obviously no press.
Well, there is, but it's only coming between you and the other person you're playing. It's not gunboat in the sense like you can't talk, though I suppose you can get it set up like that, but you definitely can chat. And I know in the games I played on Conspiracy, there's a little bit of chatting, and sometimes usually you're pretty quiet if you're losing, but if you're winning, you're willing to say a few things,
All right. Well, we have a map up here, fellas, and it says Spring 1960. I assume it's a game. What game are we looking at?
This would be the finals game that I played.
And who did you play against?
I played against Europe, who was also, I think, in the finals against B-Cypher. Is that right?
So last year's tournament ended kind of interestingly because I think I had beaten Europe previously, so the way the finals worked, there wasn't really a true final. But he was a runner-up last year as well, yeah.
Okay.
How many people played? How many entrants this year?
40.
40. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So tell us what we're looking at here. Either one of you, and B-Cypher, just comment whenever you want.
Yeah. So this is the first moves. These are all pretty normal, except there's a difference. The only real difference normally that happens in Spring 1960 is sometimes Australia goes to the Indian Ocean, and it goes there to bounce the Red Army that's in Shanghai and that's going towards India. Now, I personally don't like that. And by the way, I'm NATO in this game. I'm the blue. So I guess
you're the good guys.
Right. Yeah. So if I guess my question for B-Cypher there is like, what's your preference? Do you like going to Japan, or and why? What preference do you have for that, and why?
I think my preference is always for Japan. And I think that if anyone's looking at this and also wondering why Shanghai doesn't go to Saigon, it's mostly because that kind of strands your army out there for doing anything that's usually picked up later. But usually I go towards Japan first, if only because that means that the next year, what will usually happen is if you don't build in LA, you have to somehow hold it with your other army that's moving to Alaska. And so as a result, if you don't have Japan in place, you can't bounce the fleet that's in Vladivostok, that's bouncing in the Bering Sea there. So it kind of limits your ability to get other supply centers in the future, provided that your opponent is playing generally the same way they usually play.
Yeah, that's how I feel too, because Japan I think is really important. Having a fleet there in Japan I think is really important to keep USSR from getting a stranglehold on the southeast. And because my personal opinion, I think getting the southeast, in my opinion, is the most important region to get control of, because I think it's easier to defend that region than any of the others. Um, and because of that, you can push your units to other places. At least that's what I found, especially as NATO. I think that's really important to take over. And so putting a fleet in Japan, it's going to allow you to play defense when the USSR makes builds in the following year. And then the other part of this is, and I thought about this early on in the tournament. You know, if you go towards India to bounce him, right, then each person's only going to be getting 3 builds rather than 4. And my opinion, I think it's more important for NATO to get more units quickly than it is USSR. I don't know what's your thoughts on that.
I think I'd agree with that, just because you always kind of want to build in Australia, because you're one against many home supply centers over there, and so as a result you have to almost always build in Australia per turn, depending on how you're doing. And so as a result, that's kind of one down the hatch already, and then you have the other places that you need units really quickly, and then you just need a lot more quickly first, just to deal with all of the possible USSR I guess pokes at your defenses, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think in the early game, USSR has more attack points than NATO does.
Mm-hmm.
And at least that's how I feel. But I feel like long term, like if you're playing a long game, once NATO gets their foothold, they can almost like boa constrictor wrap themselves around USSR. So I don't know exactly how everything breaks down, but I would be really interested to know, like, games that go from, let's say, 1967 on, how many of those wins are NATO in comparison to USSR. I'd be really interested in that, because in this tournament there were 2 different games where I was down 3 as NATO and I came back. And a lot of it was just being able, my position was so strong there as NATO, I was able to grind that out before the USSR won. But I think that's another reason why I go to Japan. I think it's better for NATO to get 4 than for USSR to only get 3. So that's my thoughts on it.
All right, let's go to the builds. I'm going to switch here, and you should see them. What's going on?
Yeah, we're skipping over the fall there. So these were my builds. They're all pretty standard. I don't know if you do anything different when it comes to NATO, but I pretty much, it's going to be Fleet London, New York, Fleet Australia, and then an army in Istanbul. So that's pretty automatic, I think, for me. So, Bcypher, as you look at the builds I did there for NATO, does any of that any different than what you would normally do?
No, I don't think so. I think usually a fleet in London to bounce in the Norwegian Sea, a fleet in New York, and then the reason why there's nothing in LA is that you can bring Alaska down, and then you can actually convoy Toronto to Quebec, move Toronto to Quebec, convoy across the Atlantic to Brazil.
Right, and that's, so this is an interesting moment, because I feel like what NATO does in North America, the elite and experienced players actually play it differently than I would say, like, people that are maybe, I would say, more advanced to the beginners. And so when I started, what I would normally do with my armies is I wouldn't do that convoy. I would push Toronto back into the Midwest. I'd push Alaska back into the Western Canada, and that way you could block either one. And then I found out, oh, you can do that convoy over to Brazil, move the fleet out. But here becomes the issue. If you really want to play defensive, and USSR is doing those 2 fleet builds, which I like to do, the only real way for you to play defensive well is to do Japan to the Yellow Sea and not Japan to the Barents Sea, because if they outguess you, they can take Japan, right? If he pushes it to Sea of Japan and then also the Yellow Sea. So it's in a lot of ways on an elite play, I a lot of times will push my armies down for defense and not push my army over to Brazil. The only reason why I did it differently this turn is because with looking over some of Europe's past play, I knew that his chances of going to the Yellow Sea were pretty much none. He wasn't going to go there, which I generally don't go there either, because you want to get a unit. But sometimes people, I think middle of the tier players will try to attack Japan and try to be like a little they'll try to make a little trick so they can grab Japan from you when you go to the Bering Sea. So that's the only reason why I kind of made that normal move to convoy over, because in a lot of my other games up to that point, I didn't do it that way. I actually normally wanted to go Japan to the Yellow Sea just to make sure that I didn't lose Japan.
Yeah, I think that I kind of just have it wired in at the moment just to do Japan, bounce, and bearing just so that I can get that convoy. Because what happens then is that provided that everything else goes correctly, which is, a big if, but provided that actually happens, that the Brazil army can go up and threaten Panama and Havana,
right.
In a way that you wouldn't be able to have that influence otherwise.
Right. Yeah. And that probably comes a little bit more to my play style, that as whoever I play, my general play style is I don't want to fall behind not more than 1 unit by the end of 1961. And so if you throw it up there to the Bering Sea and you only are going to use that army to try to block to 1, and then they do the Vlad to the Sea of Japan and Shanghai out to the Yellow Sea, then you can actually lose Japan, and there's nothing that he can do about it. So the more conservative approach is not to do that, and actually to try to block the Yellow Sea, which actually works out really good if he tries that, because then he's not going to get a build, and you're going to be threatening either India or grabbing Indonesia yourself. So I really do like, I probably do that a lot, but I didn't do it this turn, which I don't. Do you have, Go Horns, do you have the Spring 1961 moves?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, so that's why I in the higher levels that I played NATO in this tournament, I actually was going to the Yellow Sea more. But in this one, I was pretty positive he wasn't going to do that, so I could go and do the Brazil convoy, which is really nice. If you can pull that off, it's very, very helpful, because you're going to have to keep his fleet more centered and do that.
Or so just force a build in Havana when normally they might not have to.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I don't know, back on the builds, like the USSR probably has a little more flexibility on the choices that they do with builds. If maybe we can go back there real quick, Go Horns. Is there I occasionally don't build in Leningrad. Are the builds that Europe did, are those pretty much the builds that you always do, or are there exceptions?
I think those are usually the builds that I do, because you want to have Leningrad bounce in the Norwegian Sea at least, so that because it's actually a really important sea to hold. I think personally. The only other question is whether you want to build Albania and Moscow and lose one of the builds in Shanghai or Vladivostok, and I have seen games where that succeeded against me, just because I was kind of surprised by just like the sudden onslaught of armies to the Mediterranean area. But
So this brings up actually an interesting thing. Now I noticed you and Coffee and Keyboards had this thing where like neither of you could win as the USSR.
yeah, and then it actually switched over to NATO for a while.
Right. And so there was something I noticed that I actually made a recommendation to him because I noticed you both were building Army Moscow rather than Army Albania. And I personally think Albania is the more important one than Moscow.
Yeah, I've been kind of because as you can see from that that next slide, the next move,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of requires you to, if you want to actually push into West Germany,
Right.
it kind of requires you to have another guess at bouncing the Istanbul army in Ukraine. And I
Yeah.
think that what that causes is it causes a kind of early game. I don't want to say like an early game like crisis moment, but like an early game decision for you. And Cold War is full of these, where you have these decisions where it's a coin flip whether someone's going to move one complicated set of moves or the other complicated set of moves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why I enjoy the variant actually. But this kind of requires you to just guess that, and in this case it works out well. But there's a perfectly normal set of moves where you could do Istanbul to like Greece or something, and then West Germany to East Germany, and then just completely take it from just the lack of a bounce.
Right. And the reason why I prefer Albania over Moscow is because it gives you offensive possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like building Moscow instead of Albania takes away that option. And not only that, there's depending on how you want to play USSR, because there's a few different options with like it's just like you said, you know, Cold War, especially in 1961, is all about, I would say, at least from how I approach it, risk mitigation. So a lot of people will treat it like a coin flip. I generally prefer to make the move set that is most likely not to lose me the game in 1 year. So I'm okay with going behind, really, even in the first year, just as long as it's only one. And so the Albania move, I think, is helpful because you do then have the option to attack in different ways, West Germany, and there's also some options too with there's some ways to do some defensive assignments too, depending on what they go. He, you know, going to Denmark, I probably should have guessed that he was going to do that, but I chose not to. I didn't get it. So that was good for him. He's going to put some pressure on me. And I think, as I recall, I think at the end of this year, he is going to be up one on me.
Yeah, and what's nice is that being up one or down one in this doesn't have to be a death sentence. And obviously, you know, we'll see that you'll be down 3, so, you know.
Yeah. All right.
Usually, if you're down 2, that's a death sentence. Usually, if you're down 2, that's when you're probably going to lose the game. I think, once again, I'd be interested in knowing the statistics of how many people come back being down 2. I'd have to guess it's pretty small.
Yeah.
All right, we switch to the next slide here. My big mistake.
This was mine, because in this particular move set, I was actually set up to go up 1 if I just played conservatively. I think this is right. Am I looking at the right one? No, I think, okay, so it's going to be 2 years. This is the setup, okay? This was the good move. It's going to be the next one that's bad. So this here is, I had to, you know, I grabbed India, so that was good. Also, now this is something that people might have wondered why I did this, if they're looking close. So the Eastern Pacific Fleet could have taken Panama here, but instead I moved it to the Bering Sea, I think. So I move it out rather than take it. Now, does that seem interesting to you at all?
Yeah, that was a question that I had earlier, but I assumed it was under my big mistake, so you're going to explain it.
No, that was a good one. That was a good one. It wasn't a bad mistake. That was actually a good one. So the main reason I did that, here's what I figured. I figured that Panama, well, first of all, if he moved that way, I could bounce it. All right. So, but if he didn't move that way, I'm going to get a build anyway by doing that. So regardless, if I push my fleet that way, I'll get that, and I can always go back and take Panama later. So I thought, okay, I'll put that in my back pocket, and I will either bounce him here and still get Panama anyway, or I'll be able to get that one build. When I played everything out on this side, I found that this was offensively going to be the best thing for me in the next 2 years to make that move, and again, possibly be able to, like, so for instance, if he did Japan to Bering Sea and I bounce him, then I'm actually getting Vlad, and then can also take Panama myself. So it actually gives me 2. So that was my thought process on it. And I thought even if it does go that, I'm still going to get a build one way or another. So I was happy with that.
Let's go to the next slide then.
Yeah. Because it's here where if I would have just played conservative, I would have been up 1. At this point, I'm down 1. And if I just played conservative, I would have switched. And I really feel like I could have grinded out the win then in a few years. And this was a mistake on a few fronts. So the big mistake was this. I didn't bounce Iran. And my thought process was this. I thought if I move down to Iran and he doesn't bounce me there, I'm going to have 2 of my units trapped by that army there. And so I was really thinking positionally. And so then I thought a little more and I said, you know what? And this was really stupid. I thought, you know what? If I support Norwegian to Leningrad, because I'm also threatening Moscow, right? I thought he probably won't support that, and he'll try to bounce Moscow or something like that. Something's going to happen. I will probably get that. Iran's probably going to be fine. And my whole thought there was, I do not want to get my armies trapped down there. And that was stupid. So that was stupid. I should have moved there to bounce, and I should have done that just to make sure that I got that 1 extra build. And so I didn't do that. And really what I should have done, what I missed was I should have done Norwegian to the North Sea, because then I would have been in a great position to build in London. And as long as he didn't move there, which if he moved to London, I would just get France. But I should have moved to the North Sea, because that North Sea is like one of those prime positions that if you can hold it, I mean, you're going to put so much pressure on that region, because you can get to 4 supply centers and then also influence lots of supply centers straight from it too. So I should have done Norwegian to North Sea. That was really stupid. And then blocked Iran. And so when that I think we both maybe, do I have to burn a fleet after that? I'm trying to remember.
All right. Should I switch the slides?
Yeah, I think we both went up. That's what happened. I think we both got a build, but instead of me being up, we just both got one.
Okay, I've switched to the next slide.
Okay. So I think you had a question here about this particular one.
Was this the one where you swapped 4 supply centers?
Yeah.
It looks like it. Yeah, it was just yeah.
So he's going to get both of them. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He's going to get both of them, and then I'm going to have to come back. Yeah.
Yeah, this move swapped 4 entire supply centers between the 2 of you, and it wasn't. No one gained or lost anything. It was just a complete switch of positions around. And the question that I had was, did you think about like positioning in terms of that, or were you just sort of like, oh, I need to not lose 4 supply centers?
No. At this point, when with I'm being down, being down and him having units all over the place, at this point it was just I've got to keep up with him. And so for a little while, until I can get until he has to start burning stuff, because I'm going to have to, I think, burn a unit at the end of this turn or the next turn, and he's going to get up 3 on me. At this point, it was just I've got to figure out a way to make sure. So you can see I moved that fleet back to Eastern Pacific to finally take Panama. I was like, okay, this is my chance to grab it now. That was the one I had in my back pocket. And I went back and grabbed it. And that was the main reason I had moved out of there, because I figured I could keep those 2 down and come grab it when I needed it. But no, this was very much, there was no grand strategy at this point. But I think in the next year, there was a little bit more strategy.
Yeah,
and that's
I'll switch. And then I think B. Cyper thought this was a surprising move.
Oh, yeah. So normally, actually, I think of all of the spheres as being kind of, they're kind of tenuously connected, but like there are places that you don't really move to in general, like the Arctic Sea. You don't really see a move from like the European area to the Pacific area very much, and you don't really see any moves between the Pacific area and the European area on land, even less, because as you can see here, it takes two turns to reach there. So normally I wouldn't even think of moving out. What is it? The Ural Mountains. I would normally not even think about moving that to West China, and that I think was a surprising move that helped, because at this point what you have is you've solidified your normal area of NATO. So like you have Australia, you have Indonesia, you have India, and now all of a sudden you don't have the ones that you previously had, but now you're already in a place to make a move on getting back those specific holdings.
Yeah, and that was kind of why, to me, the southeast is the most important one. It's the best one if you can hold that, at least get all of them, even if you still have one missing, if you can get most of them, because you can move off from that and attack really quick. And at this point, Europe was like lost, like it was under every single unit that at center that I had there was gone. And so it was like, I'm just going to be hitting my head against the wall if I'm going to. I only had like 3 units all on the outskirts, and they're looking in at the dismal red boot of the USSR that's taking the whole thing over. And so I just said, sorry guys, you're going to have to figure it out. And it was, I needed to move to an area that I could actually use that army to do something. And for me, that was definitely the southeast. And yeah, that army move is going to help unlock all of these different areas, because I'm going to be able to move the fleets and attack. And yeah, it was very, very helpful. And I think that's an important thing in this game, is you just got to be willing to shift, because if you've got to go to where the weaknesses of your opponent are. And so where he's not as well defended, that's where you got to go. And for me, that I knew if I was going to keep growing the next year, I had to go that way.
Yeah, I was gonna say you gotta, when you're playing Cold War, you gotta decide. You have to have a very, very good feeling for when to quit when you're behind, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that'll work.
I want you to notice something right now. So I want you to notice the difference in the disparity in fleets and armies. So he has, let's see, he has 6 armies to I have 4, and I'm about to burn one too in a second. So he's built a lot of armies, and my personal opinion is armies are generally not the so every single province in Cold War is next to is a coast except for Moscow. Every single one. So what that means is fleets are a lot more powerful than armies in the game. They're definitely much more mobile. So there's definitely plenty of times to build armies. And by the way, I should say one of the reasons why I never even consider building an army is because they would have been worthless and a lot of those spots were taken. But I usually seldom build any armies anyway, just because fleets are far better to attack quickly. Though there are times when armies are there, it's just not. I feel fleets are better, and he really loaded up on armies, and I think that kind of hurt his mobility long term also.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things for armies, at least, is the after you've moved it to Brazil, you can actually convoy it all the way to the Ural Mountains if you've successfully gotten the Norwegian Sea.
Mm-hmm.
And that one just it's a personal favorite of just surprising people with the reminder that convoys exist in this game.
Yeah,
But more so than not, they're not as useful as
yeah.
I'd like them to be.
Well, Urals
All right.
is a great space to hold when you're attacking because it's kind of like the North Sea. There's a lot of places to attack and put pressure on, and so that's a really key spot in Cold War to just kind of remember.
Let's talk about that army that you burned
Yeah.
on a slide entitled "The Importance of Disbands."
Yes. So this is the moment where everybody on the Discord were championing my demise because at this point I'm down 3, and um, the general idea was that I was not long for this world, but in reality, there's going to be 5 more game years left of this game. We were only halfway, and I did a lot of thinking about what to burn, and I finally decided that I would do. It was either between that or I think a unit in the Mediterranean. I think that was, or maybe it was Australia. I can't remember. But ultimately, my decision on disbanding this was all my other units could keep up pressure, and that army was putting no pressure on the USSR at all. And so, even though it was going to be a little risky to do it, because that now there would be nothing to really defend any of my North American spots easily, I thought if I'm going to keep up pressure and come back, I'm going to have to do it that way. And so that next year, I was able to do that. And that was really when things began to change because the next year he had to do a disband. And by the way, we'll put a link in the description to the actual. I mean, there's a video that Conspiracy makes that shows all the moves.
Okay,
But,
and B Cyper, what did you think of the disband?
I thought this was probably one of the better disband options. I can't see because some of the other ones, like the Mediterranean, would have just lost you outright, or maybe the West China one. But as we can see later, that was a useful tool to keep pressure. So I think it's a pretty good choice here.
And the other thing to just for everyone to keep in mind, he's 2 centers away from winning the game. So you got to get to 17. He's at 15. So 2 centers and I'm out. So everything is very, very precarious at this point.
Okay, well, let's go to the next slide.
All right. And this is skipping the whole year to when he has to do a disband. So now what's happening is I'm going to get a build and he's going to go down when he's still in the lead, 14 to 13. I personally, you can tell me what you think, but I think this was a mistake burning this fleet. And the reason was with keeping that, when he burnt that fleet, that meant now I was going to have a lot of options on how to move those fleets to attack his presence. And whereas if he had kept that other one, I really would have had to keep those units all bogged down. But when he burnt that, that meant that I was going to be able to throw more forces to take things quicker. So I personally feel like he probably should have burnt something maybe more in Europe, or even maybe one in the Med possibly, or maybe even Pakistan perhaps. But I think that was the wrong one to burn. But maybe you think that was right, but I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean that's the other fun part about this variant is that there's not like once you have to burn anything, you're kind of in a whole world of pain because you have everything is necessary in its own little way, even if it's not really necessary. Um, so I think that was probably one of the I I don't know. I think Paris could have probably also gone.
Oh
Uh,
yeah,
Despite East Germany being there because um, you can continually make
that's right. That's
little
what I thought he was going to
stuff.
do. Yeah, that I remember that now. That's what I thought he was going to do. I thought he was going to do that army and because he didn't really need it. And when he burnt that fleet, I remember turning to my wife, who's put up with this, and I said, "I think I won this game." And it was I felt that good about it because I knew now I was going to actually be able to start to solidify my position. And I did. I thought it was going to be the army, and so when he burnt that fleet, it was perfect.
Yeah, because now the Eastern Pacific can actually move to the Western Pacific, and you can deal Japan a knockout blow and everything else.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we'll go to the couple years forward.
Yep. And so the next year after that, we stayed the same. There was like a 50-50 guess for me to go ahead, and I didn't get it. So it stayed the same, but my position is just getting stronger. And it's at this point, the following year, then he has to do another burn. And I think this was another mistake. He burnt, I think that's the Philippines. And again, it's kind of the same thing. He could have put pressure, and by burning that, there was no pressure. Now I've locked down the Southeast. And I mean, it was getting tougher for him for decisions to make, but that your disbands are like so important in this game. And you've got, if once you release pressure from a person that and you allow them to solidify their position, then you are going to lose. And at this point, I'm just going to be, even this game could have probably gone another 2 or 3 years, even with, because he's going to do another disband that I think wasn't a good one either. It probably could have gone another 2 or 3 years longer than it did if like he really really fought it out. But I think he was done and he didn't want to do it anyway. He didn't want to prolong it. But
Yeah, I
your
mean,
disband's
when
really
you get
important.
down to like 1968, 1970, 1970 something, you're kind of getting to the point where it's a little bit of a slog towards a known conclusion kind of thing.
Right,
So
but of course,
did he surrender?
No. But his disbands to me were not. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I felt like his disbands were more like maybe they were the ones maybe he really thought him through, but I felt like they were disbands that just made it assuredly every year that I was going to be getting centers because of him just releasing pressure on me in different areas. And I'm guessing that that's because he didn't want to keep it going. But at the same point, I was down 3-2. So a lot of times there's there's a reason to keep fighting and making things difficult and not giving up, because there are a lot of players that do give up as soon as they get down one center, and they just stop really focusing on it. And I've just not putting in the mental energy because it takes time to really think through what are the best moves. And that's generally an area I don't give up on. So it worked out for me this particular game, though I think you just got to keep grinding. But those disbands made things really easy. The three that he made to allow me to win.
Did you two play each other in this tournament?
Nope.
Nope.
We did not.
We did not. We didn't in the VDIP tournament either.
No. I in the one that I lost to Europe, I think if I would have won, I would have played you. And I unfortunately made that misorder, and then I wasn't able to come back. So no, I didn't.
I sense an exhibition game coming.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
I don't play exhibitions though. I don't. I didn't play Cold War at all. Now I didn't play in the tournament last year because I was in the season 2 finals. But no, I don't think I've played an actual exhibition match since I've been back at playing diplomacy for the last 2 years. So I've only done tournaments, like period. And so I don't foresee any Cold War exhibitions for me. But
I'm taking the view listening to this podcast that you prefer NATO.
No, I actually like USSR.
Why do you believe they're inherently stronger? Why don't you both comment on which power you like to play better?
So I like USSR because I feel like you can be more creative with that power. There's a lot more. You can attack really aggressively right from the get-go. The only time I've ever lost with USSR actually was that one game where I misordered. So I really, really enjoy playing USSR. I think I really feel like I'm a stronger player. But NATO is in my opinion, a much more deliberate power where you've got your defense has to be like top notch to ward off the USSR attacks. And I think most elite players probably prefer USSR. Now I may be wrong on that, but it's you can just do a lot more with it. So I actually prefer that. I think Cold War is very well balanced. And so I guess the way I say it, USSR might have a slight advantage at the beginning, and NATO has a slight advantage once you get past 1965.
Yeah.
Cyper?
I think looking at the numbers on Conspiracy, which you can look at under like the stats page, out of 20,000 games, it's almost exactly split down the middle. I think they're off by only like 100 games between NATO and USSR. So it's incredibly balanced. But I think that NATO is stronger if you know what you're doing and absolutely don't make any mistakes, just because it kind of does actually, you have to kind of consistently play defensive and kind of plug along and find those openings when they're available, versus USSR can kind of have a little bit more of a gambity strategy. Even at the start, you can move down instead of moving across, and so you can move down into Albania, or sorry, into Istanbul first turn if you're lucky. But I think that as a result, it's more fun to play USSR, but I think I'm stronger as NATO just because it's very methodical and very much, if you know what you're doing, you kind of get a consistent feel for it.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure B-Side. Oh, go ahead, Humble.
It's a hard variant to make a lot of like definitive statements about it, because every game is so different once you get out, and it really comes down to so much about the two players that are playing. So it's really difficult to say one power is stronger than the other, just because there's so many different factors and it's so balanced. But I think newer players tend to win more with NATO too, because at least like if you have two newer players, because it's just a little bit easier to defend initially. But yeah, it's hard to really say one or the other. But USSR has more attack points, more fun things you can do with it in the first 3 or 4 years. So yeah, they're both really, really fun to play. But I've never seen, now maybe you have, but I've never seen USSR come back from 3 down. Maybe it's out there, but I've never ever had that kind of pressure, really from a NATO player, be able to put that on me. But I should say I usually feel more pressure when I'm NATO than I am when I'm USSR, at least in the early game.
Yeah, I feel like that's true. The only pressure I kind of feel when I'm USSR in the early game is if there's like an early Norwegian C move, and even then that's kind of not a usual move, so I don't think that's usually an issue.
Yeah, I don't think it's a very optimal move either. I think it's one of those ones that, people try to do these little gambit moves to maybe I can beat somebody that I'm better at, but it actually, I think, again, long term, first of all, it's one of those ones, if you don't get it right, you're pretty much lost the game if you don't guess right. And then on the second part of it, even if you guess it right, it's not really that strong anyway. It's easily equalized. But that's my opinion on the Norwegian gambit move in spring 1961 from NATO.
All right, so B Cyper, one of the questions I have is, why is your avatar Taco Bell? And don't you know that that is an abomination of Mexican food? As a Texan, it's neither Mexican food nor Tex-Mex. Explain yourself and justify your poor decision.
Oh, I mean, it is definitely not masquerading as Tex-Mex food. It's just another world of food altogether. I mean, I don't think they made any claims to that when they decided that they were going to have a buffalo chicken nacho griller or a you know breakfast sausage, or like a breakfast taco that was the outside was waffles, I think. Anyway, the point of it is that it is completely out of the realm of real food, which is why it's so wonderful.
Are you a connoisseur of
Do you
Taco
work
Bell?
at Taco Bell, or do you own Taco Bell stock?
Well, yeah, if I own, if anyone out there wants to give me Taco Bell stock, I'm down. But no, I just happen to enjoy it. Actually, it's pretty funny. There's a rather large subreddit for them as well that I know people.
Well, I have to admit, in college, and I'm going to date myself here, the 59-cent menu satisfied me on many occasions as a poor college student.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Look, I should add, when I was dating my wife, one of the reasons why I knew she was the right one for me is because we could do dates at Taco Bell and she was very happy and satisfied. And at the time, they had like a meal that you could do for like less than $3. And you got, drink, chips, taco, all that stuff. And so it was like perfect date as far as expenses. And, we just got to spend time together. But Taco Bell canceled that. And so I've not been there since. So I should say that you need to bring that deal back if you want to get my business. So that once they canceled that, I don't even think they do many deals at all. We stopped there a few weeks ago because we thought we were going to get something, and we looked there and we were like, nope, and we left. So.
All right. Well, hey, both of you, I appreciate the season 1 champ and the season 2 champ coming on to talk about Umble's first tournament victory.
Yes.
It was a fantastic podcast. The only thing I don't really like about Cold War, having heard an hour of it now, is it should either be the U.S. versus the USSR or NATO versus the Warsaw Pact. This is a mix and match here that I can't get along with, but it seems like a very interesting game. Maybe I'll play in season 3. And maybe I'll set up a purse for an exhibition between the two of you. We can raise something on Nexus. And I'm sure Umble will play for money.
I mean, Cold War is kind of a slow game. I mean, it's not a time-intensive game, which is why I played 2 tournaments with Nexus, the Gunboat and the Cold War, this summer, because it wasn't press. But yeah, I don't know. But yeah, you should try it, Go Horns. I mean, my general thought, when it comes to you is, hey, if you're already losing in one variant, why not lose in another?
You have nothing to lose. So right. There's no harm.
I have something to lose because I'm good at it, but you don't. So there's no,
right.
And that's the same for classic diplomacy. So
I'll tell you what, I'll be seeing you on the way down on the elevator. I'm watching now. It always happens. Right. When the new Umble comes along, who's not humble, we'll see how it goes. When the new kid comes, B-Cyper, you can't just take this sitting down. I want the exhibition, and I want it now. He's humiliating you.
No, not. I'm
happy to move the crown along.
Wow, that's something Umble would never say.
Here's the thing. I did my part in both tournaments because he didn't make it. So I did my part to be there in the finals, but he didn't make it. So it'll have to be, if I play it next year when the next ones come out, maybe that'll be the one. I mean, B-Cyber's obviously one of the elite players when it comes to this variant. So he's always going to be in the conversation. And for sure, there's about 3 or 4 people that I don't somehow think I'm the king of this variant or anything like that. There's 3 or 4 people that they're going to play. They're always going to be competitive in the games that they play. And he's
all right.
Yeah.
How very kind of you, and end on a positive note. Gentlemen, thank you. Thanks to diplomacybriefing.com for sponsoring this special episode of The Diplomats. You can find us on all of our social media. Thanks so much, and good night, Humble, and good night, B. Cyper.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Good night.